Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great, following the 3 H's of the channel. And in this video, it's all about the encounters and the experiences of an exchange student in Norway. So, pull up a stump with me, and let's jump into it. Thank you for watching. So I was in a cultural exchange program in high school, where I would spend my summer in Norway with a host family. My grades were much better then. They didn't really go to hell until I got to college and got depressed. But regardless, I saw a lot of weird stuff while I was there. This is just the first thing to come to mind. I was living with a family that ran a farm in Norway. I was working essentially as a part-time farmhand in a place that was a good ways outside of the nearest town. The terrible thing was the internet. Absolutely spotty reception and very slow. But it wasn't supposed to be about that. It was supposed to be a cultural enrichment program. But honestly, it felt like that I was basically hired to be a farmhand, and they got free labor out of it. But that's besides the point. I did have a very good time during my stay there. But back to what I'm talking about. Oh, and the food was good too, and I got to know some friends very well. One boy was older than me, 16 at the time, a girl about my age, and one younger sister who looked like she was 5 or so. But anyways, one night, a few weeks in, there was a bad storm coming. Like, a really bad storm. So I helped them batten down the hatches, so to speak, and I ran inside, hoping to just wait out the storm with everybody else. But then, we hear the mom yelling like a crazy person. She says that the youngest daughter, Hilda, is missing. I'm asked to help find her, and I oblige, even though I don't really know my way around any of my surroundings, and I'm pretty sure that there are rules against this. But I didn't want to say no, and I didn't want anything to happen to the kid, so I'd go along with it. We search for hours in the storm. Mom and the older daughter go back in when the wind goes crazy. Me and the older brother, who I always called Chad because he looked like the meme, go back in a bit later. The dad stays out for over an hour, but he has to come back to the house too. He looks even more like a drowned rat than anyone else. Everyone just agrees to hope that she's smart enough to find a place to hunker down and pray that she's okay until the storm lets up. It stops raining elks and polar bears sometime the next day. I go out to search the mud and hailstone-infested land around the house with the family for another hour. Thankfully, we find Hilda walking around like nothing happened. Her clothes weren't even wet. The family was ecstatic. They take her home and scold her for disappearing, but not too much. They were just happy she was safe. But something never set well with me. She was in the middle of nowhere, no cover anywhere nearby, and we left as soon as things were safe. There's no way she could have been so unfazed by everything, and the dry clothes make no sense. So I asked her a couple days later, "Where did you hide during the storm?" She said, "I didn't hide anywhere." I ask, "Oh, then what did you do during the storm?" She says, "Someone helped me, but I didn't tell anyone else in my family because he said not to." Right now, I'm slightly creeped out. I was a little worried that somebody had kidnapped her or something. So I asked her who helped her. She said, "The one-eyed man." At first, I thought that her imagination was running wild, as kids do, but nothing explained why she was okay during that awful storm. I know for me, I would have definitely died if I was lost in a storm like that. And all the other weird stuff that I saw later on made me think that she may have had a run-in with something. She acted normal for the most part after that storm, save for a couple weird changes. She took a sudden interest in horses for some reason, which her parents mentioned, albeit in an offhand comment, was something that she never cared about before. She also wanted to go outside whenever the weather got rough, something her mother was against for obvious reasons. I asked her why she wanted to be outside when there was a storm or a bad wind, and if it had anything to do with the one-eyed man she mentioned to me. I told her that I could tell her parents about it. She looked at me with that creepy, dead-faced expression that only a child can manage and said, "You don't want to do that." Now I might be a bit of a short guy, a bit of a guy that doesn't have a spine sometimes, but a child cannot intimidate me. But this was the single most upsetting thing a child has ever said to me. Something about the way she said it creeped me out to no end, but I decided that I should probably tell her mom about it the next day anyways. That night, though, I had a dream that I was by a stream, which I suddenly turned into a fish. I think it was a herring or something, but I can't remember. I started getting pulled downstream when a bird plucked me out and started shoving bread and some kind of spices in my mouth, like you do before cooking. I woke up to the sound of my window shattering. As far as I can tell, the wind might have picked up that branch and flung it through the window above my bed like a javelin. Even though I didn't see anything outside, I didn't know that there was any strong winds. It felt like the universe or something, was sending me a message to keep my mouth shut. And at that time, the message was received. I never told her mother about the conversation I had with Hilda, but thankfully, her escape attempts were not successful, at least during my stay there. The next thing that happened is a little weird, but comparatively short. The work I did changed from day to day, but I had one duty I had consistently done every night, and that was to take a bit of cheese, milk, and whatever uneaten food is left over after dinner and leave it on a plate outside of the barn. I asked them why once. The mom thought it was just a silly superstition, but the dad said, "Don't worry about it, just do it." Again, at the time I was a bit spineless, so I didn't question it, and I just kept taking out those leftovers. That is, until one night, when I had a very long day, a very tiresome day. I was so tired that I just dumped the leftovers in the trash and went to bed. I slept well, the best sleep since I got there. The next day, the barn is an absolute pigsty. Feed bags have been ripped open, water barrels tipped over, animals all let out of their pens, and literal shit everywhere. To top it off, there was a pile of shit in my work boots, which I keep inside. The dad, who I'll call Olaf from now on, walks up to me and slaps me on the shoulder before handing me a broom. He says, "You forgot to bring the plate out, didn't you?" He wishes me luck and tells me to clean it up. In other conversations, I heard them talk about what I think they called a Nissa, and I think whatever that is what I pissed off. Olaf said he wasn't superstitious, but this apparently happened to him when he was around my age, and happened to Chad once too, when they had also been tired and did not bring the plate out. I wish that either of them told me beforehand, so I could have known, and maybe my feet wouldn't smell like shit all summer. On another occasion, it was a light work day, so Chad goes to fish in a lake nearby. His sister, who I'll call Astrid because why not, decides to go along too. I follow for the same reason. We don't catch much, but the change in scenery was nice. Plus, being near Astrid without her parents nearby was fun. After a while, we realize that she walked off somewheres. Chad and I go off to look for her. I start to yell out her name, but we get no response. We circle back eventually to the spot where we were fishing, and I see wading out into the water, somewhere just out of sight, from around that area. I yell for her. There's no response again. But once she gets about waist deep, she suddenly falls in. I charge toward the lake. I get in and grab her shoulders and start pulling her back as hard as I can. Just as I start trying to pull her out, I see something farther in the water. It's murky and it's full of whatever, but I can clearly make out a pair of hands around her ankles. My eyes grow wide and I start yelling for Chad, struggling to keep Astrid's head from going underwater. Chad comes running, holding a wooden axe he says he carries when he goes far away from the house for emergencies. He runs over and chops at the shape that we can both make out in the water. Suddenly, we hear this unearthly scream, which is weird because it was under the water, but we still heard it. And then this snaps Astrid out of her weird trance. The water around Astrid's ankles turns black, like tar, slick black. We all run away like little girls and agree to just not talk about this again, try to forget that it happened. But it didn't end there. I wish I could say it did, but the next morning, Chad woke up, sweating like a politician taking a polygraph test, and sick as hell. He gets worse over the next couple of days, until Olaf's dad comes to visit. Olaf's dad, who I think his name was Siegfried or something. This guy was big and still pretty scary looking for an older man. He had begrudgingly moved into the city when he started showing signs of dementia, and they started becoming a problem. I hear him, Olaf, and a very disoriented Chad talk in Norwegian for a bit. I speak a little conversational Norwegian that I had learned before I came there, but I could not keep up with what they were saying. They were using lots of words I have never heard before. The talking turns into yelling between Siegfried and Olaf before he grabs my arm and pulls me out the door. That child is too damn stubborn. You're showing me where this lake is, boy. Show me where the fight happened. He grabs the youngest lamb on the farm while Olaf is yelling at him in Norwegian and loads it into the truck. He yells at me to ignore Olaf and get in the truck. I was scared shitless because of this. This old guy, in the early stages of dementia, still looked like he could break me in half, and I didn't know what exactly was going on, but I knew that letting this man go off by himself would be a bad idea, so I got in without question. He drives off, and I point to him where Chad took us to fish. He yanks me out of the truck and tells me to carry this lamb while he grabs some things. I show him the spot where Astrid was getting dragged into the water. The land and the water's edge was still black from the other day. He yelled something in Norwegian. I didn't understand most of it, but I looked it up later, and it translated roughly, from what I can remember, to something like this. My damn fool of a grandson took off your arm. I'm sorry, but it was his job as an older brother to protect his sister. I came with a peace offering. He grabbed the lamb, shoved a bunch of spices down its throat and 2 coins, and tossed it into the lake with its feet tied. Suddenly, there was a lot of splashing, that within seconds ends. The next day, Chad had made a miraculous recovery. Every so often, once every other week or so, Olaf would drive his family down to visit Siegfried in his house in the city. He had a nurse, but was pretty self-sufficient for the most part. She mostly just checked in and made sure that he was taking his medicine, that he was eating healthy, and helping him with whatever he wanted. Since I was part of this program, and not just an indentured servant, even if I was usually treated that way, they took me along whenever they did something like this. I also think Olaf didn't like leaving me behind at the house. Obviously, I'm technically a stranger. They would come in, greet Siegfried. He would usually make some offhanded remark about how the farm was being ran wrong, and then he would start spending time with the grandkids. He would usually start telling stories, either old fables, fairy tales, or something that he was told when he was a kid, or just stories that happened to him when he was a young man. I barely understood most of it, so I would just sit around reading, or talk to Olaf and his wife about whatever. That was until the lake incident. After that, Siegfried must have taken a bit of a liking to me, because he started telling me his stories in English, something all of his grandkids spoke anyways, and I could actually understand. The couple of times that I was there and he would be speaking English, I could make out some very interesting stuff. And this is all to set up for something he told me once after a visit. As everyone was leaving, he pulled me to the side and asked me something. He said, "How old are you?" I said, 16, sir." He said, "You still live on the farm, right? There's going to be a fog the next few days." I asked him why that matters. It's just fog. He said, "My son and grandkids are fine. They can't take anyone else from my family, but someone young like you might be in trouble." I start looking visually creeped out. He says, "If you hear voices in the fog outside the property, don't panic, don't run, and whatever you do, don't turn around. If you show any hesitation or fear, they'll take you. Just turn to face the house and walk calmly away. Don't turn around until you're inside." Olaf calls for me. I tell Siegfried I'll try to be safe, and I leave. This all sounded like nonsense to me, but the lean so far was starting to make me much less of a skeptic. And about a week later, there was one of those rare days where there was nothing to do. Unfortunately, I was still on a farm where I beat the sun awake, so I took an early morning walk in the fog. After about half an hour later, I find myself at a bit of an unmanaged tree line. I was about to turn around. I heard a voice. It sounded weird, kind of Norwegian, but kind of off, just odd. Even today, I don't remember exactly what it was, only that it sounded like a very loud whisper, like a woman reading poetry into your ear. I saw the fog churn, like something was moving, just out of sight. When I heard the laughter of what sounded like children, several children, I knew that it was time to perform a nope and leave. I started to sprint out of there like a bat out of hell, but thankfully, I remembered what the old man said, so I made a face about as calmly as possible and started just speed walking away. The whisper and laughing kept getting louder. It sounded almost seductive in between giggling. I almost lost it when I felt a tug on the back of my shirt, and then another, and then two more, and a tug on my pant leg. None of them were particularly strong, but not knowing what was trying to pull me back into the fog was really creeping me out. I sped up slightly, before I felt a pair of hands around my shoulders and a weight on my back, like I was giving a piggyback ride. I couldn't make out anything besides a few vague shapes moving in my peripheral vision. I probably could have seen something if I turned around, but seeing that Siegfried apparently knew this stuff with the lake, I thought the better of it, that I would continue to remember his words. The weight slowed me down, even more so after I felt a pair of hands wrap around my legs, like kids do when they want you to drag them along. I should say, at this point, I was actively avoiding looking around me or looking down for fear of letting them know that I was scared. But even then, I didn't really see anything except for a few weird shapes in the fog and at the edge of my vision. The giggling got louder and louder until I suddenly heard barking and growls coming from behind me. I heard some screaming and yelling coming from that direction, and I had the sudden feeling that I was being chased by something, and that something was getting closer. Against all logic, I just kept walking as fast as I could without breaking into a total sprint. I heard everything from roars to cries to the sound of fire. At one point, I even felt claws dig into my bag at one point, though I later confirmed that I wasn't actually injured. This kept up until the house was in sight. The weight dropped off. The sounds died down. The closer I got to the house, it was like somebody was slowly turning off a volume knob. Once I got to the porch, I walked in. I closed the door as calmly as possible before turning and running to my room and screaming into a pillow. I had other run-ins with fog creatures, but nothing ever so intense. This was the scariest shit that ever happened to me in my entire life. I later asked old man Siegfried why he wasn't worried about his family. He said, "They can only take one person from a family. They already got one from mine." Now this one isn't a first-hand story, but something happened that Siegfried told us when we were there. Keep in mind, some of his stories were told by an old man with early stages of dementia, speaking in his second language to his grandkids, which included a 5-year-old. So a lot of them were a bit rambly, and some were obviously exaggerated. One of them had him kill a troll to rescue his sister. He killed it with an axe. Although seeing as how even in his old age he looked like he could bench press a bear, I didn't find that so far-fetched. This one, however, he claimed was entirely true, and got defensive if anyone said anything to the contrary. As a bit of a setup, Olaf's mom disappeared when he was around 12 or 13, about a year after his little brother was born. Chad once told me that some people in the family think that Siegfried killed her because he thought she was cheating, and that Olaf didn't like mentioning her because of it. That, of course, is not how Siegfried tells the story. When Siegfried was a young man, somewhere between his late teens into his early 20s, he was never that consistent with it. He had to burn charcoal for the farm. If you don't know anything about making charcoal, you basically heat wood until it turns black, and then you can use it as better fuel. It's a tedious process that takes a long-ass time, and it's boring. But while he was doing this one day, he saw a woman in a short dress approach him. He asked her, "What are you doing here?" She said, "Oh, I live nearby. I heard there was a handsome man nearby, so I just had to come see him." She sat on his lap and wrapped her arm around him. She looked him in the eyes and asked him if he wanted to go kiss in the woods. and he would always make an exaggerated kissy face whenever he told this part. Now keep in mind, there was also the 5-year-old listening, so he was probably self-censoring. He told her that he couldn't, and that he needed to tend the fire. She was disappointed, and stood up before leaving. The next day, he was doing the same thing, and like clockwork, she came back. She tried to get him to follow her into the woods, which he denied. However, this time, he set a second plate of food beside him and asked her if she wanted some food. The work was boring and tedious, and having a woman to keep you company was a welcome distraction. She was a little shocked, but agreed. They spent the next few hours just chatting, telling jokes, and getting to know each other. When he left, he told her to come back tomorrow. It was like this every day for a few months. She would come by, ask him to follow her into the woods. He would deny and ask to share his lunch with her, and she would look disappointed before agreeing and spending a few hours with him. After about a week of this, he apparently got to see that she was hiding a cow's tail under her skirt or dress. He never elaborated on how he got to see this, or if she was hiding it because Hilda was there, but use your imagination. It was obviously to him that she wasn't a normal person, but at this point, he just liked talking to her, so he kept spending his lunch there, even on days when no farm work would bring him to that part of the property. After a few months, she stopped coming. He got worried, so he set up another charcoal burn and left out a plate of what I think he called crumb cake, which is a sort of waffle cookie dessert that he knew that she loved. He waited there for over an hour until she came out, looking upset. He asked, "Why did you stop coming?" She said, "You must think I'm too ugly to be around." She sits down with him and starts eating with a frown on her face. She told him that she realized that he would never kiss her and that she couldn't bear to be around him anymore. He told her that she would have to marry him before he did that, and proposed. Hilda asked him where Grandma's tail went that night. He says, "Oh, that came off during the wedding night." Chad and I laughed, Astrid cringed, and Hilda looked really confused. Hilda asked where Grandma went. Siegfried looked pretty sad when she asked him. He leaned over and stared at the ground. He said she had to go home. "I miss her every day, but I wouldn't change the choice to marry her for the world." He never did give anyone a straight answer as to what happened to his wife, and she didn't have a grave as far as I know. All I do know is that she was essentially an absolute bombshell, if any descriptions are any indication. I wish I could show you what she looked like, but my phone was just awful, and I didn't have a very good camera either. And this is the last one that I have for you for now. I don't have many more that involve me that weren't small or repeats of the fog or the storms making Hilda weird or me hearing voices. All that being said, while this isn't necessarily the scariest brush with the paranormal, it's probably the closest I came to dying. A sheep got out one day when I was about a week off going home. If you don't know about sheep, they're all some of the most dumb farm animals on the planet. So I get sent out to search a part of the land that I knew probably had no sheep there. I was looking through some dense woods when I came across some lingonberries. I started eating them. It was a little early in the season, but I wasn't going to complain. I grab what looks like the ripest, and I put them in my hat. I stop to take a break after a while, and I sit down. I look away for a second, and I look back to see a raccoon eating the berries out of my hat. Something about this looked weird, but I didn't notice it in the moment. I try to shove the raccoon. I fail. I pick up my hat, and I move on with half of what I picked gone. I angrily search more until I smell what I think is blood. Nervously, I follow my nose until I come across a sheepskin that looks like it had been slaughtered recently. I WTF before I feel a sharp pain in my head. That trash panda had followed me and chucked a rock at the back of my head. I pick up a rock to reciprocate before I have an audible realization. I don't think there are any raccoons in Norway. This thing makes this unsettling smile, the sort of thing that shouldn't be possible with how an animal's jaws should have been shaped. Whatever this thing was, somehow it knew what animals were familiar to me, and it was deliberately trying to screw with me. I drop my hat and the rock before running away as fast as my legs could carry me. I hear this deep, rumbling laughter boom through the forest. I swear I felt the ground shake. I see a sheep's skull fly past my face and hit the tree so hard that it breaks open. I start screaming, "I'm sorry," in Norwegian, the best I could, while I ran. I eventually got out of that part of the woods when the laughter stopped. Whatever this shape-shifting thing was, it must have gotten its kicks for the day and left me alone. I lie and say that I didn't find anything, but I searched enough to say it's definitely not there. I ask Siegfried about it a few days before I leave. He tells me that it is harmless so long as I didn't take anything of his, and that the sheep probably ate grass off of his land. I realize that I ate fruit, I think. Great. Siegfried's eyes go wide. He tells me that I should leave something of value at the edge of our land before I leave, just to be safe. I buy lingonberry pie and my cell phone, which I was due for an upgrade anyways, at the border of the woods that I found him in, along with an apology written in my best Norwegian. I'm not dead, so apparently it worked. So, I hope you enjoyed those, and if you did, maybe you'll like and subscribe, and if you're already subscribed, make sure to like the video, and if you'd like to leave a comment, by all means, it helps the channel. And if you have a story of your own, I have an email in the description below that you can send it to if you'd like to. Also down there, usually, is a PayPal and a Patreon, if you'd like to support the channel that way. And here on YouTube, there's super thanks, which is always appreciated as well. Now, one thing that's wild to me is like the stuff that Canada has in common with the Scandinavian countries. It just makes me want to visit there even more. And one thing that I thought was interesting in particular is that we have a very similar phenomenon here with the fog, although it's usually a woman's voice, and it's usually calling your name or something similar, and people usually only hear it when they're hopelessly lost in the woods. I personally have never had that happen, but I've heard stories, and getting lost in the woods here is very easy, considering that my province is 77% dense forest or something like that. Anyways, enough about me. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you enjoyed pulling up a stump, and with that, I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for pulling up that stump, and thank you for watching. See you later.